Walter Goldschmidt was born in 1913 in San Antonio, Texas. Growing up with German-speaking parents, he got first-hand exposure to both ethnicity and class divisions in Texas society. He earned an undergraduate anthropology degree from UT Austin in 1935, then moved to Berkeley, where, like most anthropology students, he did fieldwork with Pacific Coast Native American tribes in 1936 and 37. However, economist Paul Taylor got him interested in the issues surrounding farm labor in the growing California agribusiness industry, and his 1942 PhD dissertation focused on this issue with fieldwork in the San Joaquin Valley. This article was based on that same fieldwork. Although Goldschmidt himself was a self-declared atheist from an early age throughout his life, he extended his descriptions of the class system in the farming town he studied to include its effect on the class hierarchy that appeared there among different religious denominations. After graduate school, Goldschmidt worked for the Bureau of Agricultural Economics at the U.S. Department of Agriculture, where his continued research on how agribusiness impoverished the lives of ordinary people in small towns got him in hot water with angry Republican lawmakers from California. He eventually moved to Los Angeles and helped to found the anthropology department at UCLA, serving as department chair from 1964 to 1969. Goldschmidt died in 2010 at his residence in Pasadena. As soon as we see Walter Goldschmidt refer to his research as an ethnological study, we understand why he chose to study a little town in California's central San Joaquin Valley. This is another example of the holistic anthropology approach, seeking to take in an entire community and study it firsthand in all of its details and different aspects. In fact, this article about the churches in the town was actually only a sidelight that he added onto his main subject of study, the emergence of impersonal divisions of social class in a community. He was mainly interested in the social and economic forces that caused that process of emergence, but as a good anthropologist, he saw the connections to people's religious lives and documented those connections in this article. The little town of Wasco, California, where he gathered his interviews and other information, is a couple of dozen miles northwest of Bakersfield, right in the middle of one of the richest and most productive agricultural regions anywhere on Earth. At the time he conducted this research, a lot was going on in California's Central Valley. For one thing, the Second World War was going on at the time, even though Pearl Harbor hadn't brought the United States into the conflict yet when he started to observe the town. Wartime economic activity increased the demand for everything coming out of the fields around the town and kept everybody very busy. For another thing, the ecological disaster of the Dust Bowl had driven millions of Americans off the land of the ravaged, drought-stricken midsection of the country, and many of them, like the Joads in Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath, had gone from living on their own family farms to living as itinerant migrant workers, wandering the country looking for any kind of work they could find. Many of these ended up in the Central Valley in California, and so in Goldschmidt's research. And finally, the recovery from the Great Depression and the beginnings of industrial-scale irrigation farming also was just getting started in California, fundamentally revolutionizing not only the system of farming itself, but the social relations and character of all the communities caught up in it. All of these dramatic, life-altering transformations were in full swing when he showed up in Wasco to take notes. The most obvious feature of life in the town, to his trained anthropologist's eye, jumped out at once from every angle. On the first page of his article, he brings up the word caste, a concept you may associate with the caste system in India. But castes can appear in any culture, despite how often we may connect them to Hindu religion in that part of the world. A caste is simply a group of people who occupy roughly the same location in society as defined by the type of work they do and where they fit into the status hierarchy of society. To call such a group a caste, the essential point must be that your membership in it is defined for you, ascribed to you without any choice on your part the moment you are born. Whatever the caste of your parents, you inherit that from them, and there's nothing you can do to change it for the rest of your life. Caste identity is reproductive identity defined by the reproductive relationships between people, handed down within families as the basic building blocks of social identity. Goldschmidt saw at once that such castes existed in Wasco. Some people were black, some were Mexicans, and some were whites, all ascribed characteristics inherited from your parents, impossible to change, and exerting definitive impact on what you would spend your life doing. Although he points out these locked-in ethnic caste layers in the town, Goldschmidt only considers this social fact as a minor side topic in his analysis. His central research interest concerns additional layers of stratification within the ranks of the white ethnics he studied, layers that he describes as divisions by social class rather than caste. While caste identity is reproductive identity, tying you forever to your parents and other relatives, social class is a characteristic of individual people. Of course, there's a strong inherited component to social class, too, but to transmit your caste to your child, all you have to do is give birth. To transmit your social class, you have to work indirectly through the neighborhood where you buy a house, the school where you send the children, and most important for our topic, the church you attend. Class transmission is a complicated social relay race in which you have to hand off the baton to a whole succession of other institutions outside your family in order to achieve the desired end result. Obviously, social class is thus a slippery, complicated thing to measure, as well as to create for yourself or for your children. While European social scientists tend to put more emphasis on how you're connected to the economic processes of producing goods and services for people, American sociologists tend to look more at the consequences of those connections when defining social classes. The first of the three dimensions of the conventional American definition of social class involves money. Not only how much you earn, but increasingly important in contemporary society, how much inherited wealth you get from others. The second concerns your occupation, partly because that is related to how much money you earn, but also because different jobs carry different levels of prestige, not always lining up with the money. The third dimension involves power to get what you want in life, not only by spending your money to get it, but also by just having a legal right to it by virtue of legal rules about property and other rights and privileges you can claim. Goldschmidt's anthropological approach to social class reflects both the European and the American approaches. Like the Europeans, he is mainly concerned with people's occupations, with where they fit into the system of producing things in the economy. Since this perspective views your work as your basic existential activity that defines your social position, your life chances, and even your subjective ways of thinking and feeling. Like the Americans, he develops a whole list of occupational categories, but in the final analysis, he gets European on us again by sorting them all into two basic groups. One that he calls the nucleus of society in the town, composed of the big farm owners, the businessmen, managers, and professionals. Everybody else gets lumped together into what he calls the laboring population. Whether he's talking about these two basic sides of the social and economic coin, or examine all of his different occupational groups, the central question he addresses in this article is how such social class distinctions translate into the religious lives of people. Are these class distinctions random, unimportant, and unrelated to organized religion? Or is there some connection between economic and religious institutions as they shape people's lives in Wasco, California? If you wanted to examine social class differences between different religious denominations in Miami or Houston, the vast size of these metro areas would force you to rely on administrative records. And the problem is there aren't any. No government records can ask anything about religion, and churches do not, as a rule, keep records on the social class of their members. So here the advantage of Goldschmidt's holistic ethnological field approach comes to the fore. He only has to go around to the 10 churches in town and talk in person with people in each one to gather all kinds of occupational information. It may seem a little out of order for us to start here with his chart 2 rather than chart 1, but if you read his discussion of these figures carefully, you'll see that they have been mislabeled and switched when they were set into the manuscript by the publisher. He actually starts talking about what is labeled chart 2 first. On the far right side of this figure, we find the average occupational distribution for all the churches in town combined. A little over half of this total were in the 3 higher status occupation groups, and a little less than half occupy the 2 lower status groups of laborers. If you compare this column with the one on the far left side of the figure for the so-called nuclear churches with higher status and respectability, you find above average shares of the 3 top occupational groups, especially the professionals, managers, and business people. Then, if you look at the outsider churches column, you find almost nobody in the business, professional, and manager occupations, and a below average share of the farm owners and managers too. Instead, this group of churches includes a large majority of all skilled workers in town and almost all of the unskilled workers. These 2 sets of churches start to come into focus in terms of social class as soon as we see this contrast. The remaining column in this chart represents occupations found in the Catholic Church. Goldschmidt is startled to find that this occupational mix matches almost perfectly the overall mix for the town as a whole found in the far right column. This means that the Catholics are a representative sample of the total population, not skewed one way or the other towards the highest status or lowest status populations. He tries to explain this away by saying that the laborers in the Catholic Church are almost all Mexicans, so that there's a kind of social class division or split within this Catholic congregation itself. This hardly resolves the matter, though, because by giving a detailed quote from the priest about the ethnic limitations of the Mexicans in his parish, Goldschmidt is actually admitting that the Catholics are able not only to mix together different social classes defined by occupations, but also to arrange for these different caste-like ethnicities to worship under the same roof. They may have different separate social events outside church, but they're also all Catholics at church. We should recognize that this in part happened because the centralized Catholic Church, through its hierarchy of bishops and cardinals, owns all Catholic church buildings, assigns priests to them rather than letting congregations call their pastors, and would not allow separate Catholic congregations for different ethnic groups to be started in the same town, even if the people there wanted them. This is an internal structural difference between how Catholic and Protestant churches are organized. No doubt you also have noticed that after he talks about Mexican and black residents constituting caste-like ethnic groups in the town, not another word appears in this article about the black residents. The Mexicans are in the Catholic Church, which was already in California long before it became a part of the United States, but black farm workers coming to the San Joaquin Valley to get away from Jim Crow oppression in the Deep South simply disappear from the picture. Goldschmidt never mentions visiting any black church or even whether there was one. This could mean that Wasco may have been, like Modesto and many other towns in the Central Valley, a sundown town where African Americans had to be out of town completely before dark. They may have lived, as often happened, in a small community of their own, completely outside the town, only showing up for work on farms or in businesses in town if any would hire them. People in 1944 probably never gave this a second thought when the article was published. That was the way of the world, after all. This is a good reason by itself to consider research from different time periods to see how both sociology and American society have changed in some ways, and perhaps not so much in others. When Goldschmidt takes apart the 2 summary groups of white Protestant denominations from the previous figure, he shows us in what is labeled Chart 1 how each denomination took its place in a smooth gradation of changing occupational distributions. The 4 bars on the left of this chart average together to give the nuclear churches already considered, while the 4 bars on the right average together to give the outsider churches. This early documentation of the social class hierarchy of Protestant denominations has been studied, replicated, expanded, and discussed now for about 80 years. If you could do this study again today in some other town in America, you might well find almost the same picture. On the left, over half of the people in the old Saltwater Pilgrim Church of Congregationalists were professionals, business owners, and managers. Another fourth were farm owners and managers. Here we obviously find the truly elite church in town. The other 3 nuclear churches on the left side of the chart differ from the elite Congregationalists mainly in having fewer of those town occupations and more of the country occupations of farm owners and managers. Like the Congregationalists, the Methodists included almost no unskilled workers. More unskilled workers actually show up in the Baptist and Adventist congregations, actually very similar in composition to the Nazarenes, who Goldschmidt put on the right side of the chart. After that, the top occupations virtually disappear from the other outsider churches, until we find the Pentecostal church composed almost totally of unskilled workers, with a small group of skilled workers still mixed in, but nobody much else. If you've been in more than one kind of church yourself, and if you were paying any kind of sociological attention to your surroundings, you may have noticed some hints of this same pattern, which has persisted now for at least a century in American religion, and perhaps much longer. These facts are clear and striking. What remains for us now is to see how Goldschmidt explained the causes of this denominational spectrum of occupations to himself and to us. Goldschmidt was not satisfied merely to document the status hierarchy that he found among Protestant congregations in Wasco, California. He wanted to understand how and why such stratification by social class happened. Why do social classes sort out into separate denominations? Most of his explanation concentrates on what we might call the style of worship in each church. This explanation from 1944 actually lays the groundwork for later market competition theories about religion, because it implies that each congregation is offering a special product in the religious marketplace, trying to attract consumers. The difference here is that Goldschmidt does not just assume, as the later supply-sider theories would do, that all those consumers are just one big homogeneous mass of similar individuals, all looking for religion. Goldschmidt recognizes that the market for these diverse religious services is split up into different social classes of people. Each class of people prefers a different style of worship, so if your church adopts a particular style, that's the class of people you will attract. For example, when Goldschmidt went to the elite Congregationalist church in town, he found a deliberately calm, peaceful style of worship. These are people who are comfortable because they're in charge of the town, and they want their religion to assure them that their elite status is part of God's plan. They want to hear educated, rational discussion from the pulpit and to see other people like themselves in the pews, to confirm by consensus that their comfort and elite status are legitimate, perhaps even that these are well-earned rewards of their own efforts and their faith. When Goldschmidt asked the congregational pastor why there was only one farm laborer in the church, the pastor pointed at the elaborate church building and replied, "You can see why they don't come here. They don't come here because they feel uncomfortable. They can live in a tent and feel comfortable." This style of worship, including not only the calm sermons, but also the elaborate building and the well-dressed congregation, confirms for them their elite status and gives it a religious seal of approval. A woman in the community confirmed what the pastor said when she told Goldsmith, "We don't go to any church here. We don't have the clothes. Back home there were little old meetings and you could go any old way." In contrast, Goldschmidt looked at the uneducated field workers who had escaped from the Dust Bowl and ended up as economic refugees in town. These people tended to congregate together in the Pentecostal church with fiery sermons about wickedness in the world, inspired cries and shouts from the congregation, and a reassuring absence of putting on airs of fancy clothes or expensive wooden pews in the church. When he talked to the pastor of one of these outsider churches, the pastor told him frankly that poor people get a sensual or physical thrill, and in that there's an attraction. These poor folks get no other thrill out of life. Goldschmidt goes further than this himself, explaining that the appeal of the emotional religion for the disenfranchised is this: it denies the existence of this world with its woes, it denies the values in terms of which they are the underprivileged, and sets up in their stead a putative society in the kingdom of God, where they are the elite. These styles of worship are hardly the end of the story, though. When we consider Atkinson's research among the Wana in Indonesia, we found an ethnic group trying to use religion as a tool to celebrate and affirm the ways that they were different from other ethnic groups. and to ensure that they could continue to be different and enjoy their own distinctive ethnic culture. But now when we consider the layers of people in different social classes, we find no such affirmation of a shared identity. One woman did tell Goldschmidt that she preferred to be with her own class, but these classes are vast, impersonal layers in society, not little personalized communities like the Wana. At the same time that you might find comfort and acceptance from worshiping with people who share your economic condition in life, and in sermon messages that speak to the special problems and experiences of that economic condition, everybody also is aware at all times of the clear hierarchy of class position, that some people are better than you and some are worse. The emotional Pentecostal worship style can provide relief, but after church, the hierarchy is still there. This creates an ambivalence that runs from top to bottom of class denominationalism, an awareness that some churches, as well as some people, are inferior or superior to others. That awareness of the hierarchy within class denominationalism creates a pressure for upward mobility that gets stronger the lower you go down the ladder. Goldschmidt describes a hypothetical group of underprivileged people who donate freely from their small earnings and erect a church that grows successfully. This success leads them to hire a more educated pastor to replace lay leaders, and this new pastor brings in a more inhibited style of worship suitable to the middle class, because the members aspire to rise up to that class level. They may have enjoyed the emotional services, but in a way they're also ashamed to admit it because it brands them with their lower class origins. Goldschmidt found the example of the local Nazarene congregation the most interesting. That pastor, after making the earlier remark about people being attracted by a thrill, also told him, "You can't build a church on that kind of element. My predecessor and I have appealed to a more sturdy and consistent type of people. We are given to the sane, intelligent presentation of the gospel truths." Here we see not only the familiar phenomenon of individual people switching to better denominations as they move up in the economic hierarchy of careers, but also entire congregations and denominations that may try to remake and improve themselves in terms of their class image and standing. When we add the facts of life in layers of social classes within society to the Protestant fragmentation of religious market competition among different denominations, Goldschmidt points out that as each denomination settles into its own market niche tailored to different levels of social class, such a competitive situation actually may reinforce and support the very social class inequalities reflected by such class denominationalism. He asks a rare question about morality in this context. Is the sectarian character of this class denominationalism in essence an evil one? Class denominationalism is not a cause, but a result. The causes lie deep in the industrial character of the farm economy. Since the course of industrialization in farm production is set, and since its fruits are many and good, there can be no turning back. Economic classes exist, but they may be open or closed. The social distance between them may be great or small. If Protestantism would avoid these evils of class discrimination within its own ranks, it must fight against social discrimination outside its confines. This is pretty revolutionary talk for 1944 in the San Joaquin Valley, looking ahead to things like the United Farm Workers Union and other non-religious issues. If we want to continue concentrating on religion itself, we might simply note that this class denominationalism also was possible only because the fragmented, competitive nature of Protestant denominations created the alternatives that could line up to create the status hierarchy of congregations. The Catholic alternative of forced unity dictated from above by the centralized church hierarchy created a congregation in Wasco that avoided class denominationalism to a much greater degree.